By nature, the ancient Egyptian was a lover of joy, a fun seeker, and also a merry man. So in his daily life, he didn't only care about the religious sides of his life and cults, which is evident in the amount of monuments he left behind that reflect his creeds and religious thoughts, but he cared also about joy and laughter, and he was really optimistic and gave everything its share of care. The ancient Egyptian left us numerous evidences picturing festivals and dancing and singing and playing music with proofs of fine art and great taste which characterize the Egyptians since the oldest ages. Not a single complete tomb of a nobleman or one of the high officials of the state is empty of scenes of dancing and singing and playing music in front of the deceased. The festivals in ancient Egypt were numerous and were celebrated for various reasons. Some of these feasts were celebrated all across the country or in a certain city, and they varied between official feasts or religious feasts or funerary or seasonally or annual ones. The ancient Egyptian used the word heb to express a feast. The feast was a relief through which the Egyptians expressed their wishes and high hopes. Thus, they were keen on performing its rituals with great religious dedications. In spite of the existence of many and diverse non-Egyptian festivals, yet the information available about their feasts are not complete, but they could be completed and brought in a complete picture by gathering all sources and scattered evidences about these feasts and the reasons and their characteristics. The thorough study of the ancient Egyptian festivals depended on several sources, amongst which are the calendars and the lists of festivals recorded in temples, the first of which is a list written in the temple of the Ramesses III Habu city, in addition to the reliefs and scenes of temples and tombs, and the paintings and statues and papyri and religious books. When studying and analyzing the ancient Egyptian feasts, there are several controversial issues that pop up, like the configuration of the feasts, of whether they are celestial feasts or Hebu nude pet, or religious or daily life ones, or Hebu new true. Also, there are doubts about the difference of time and timing and places, or the calendar on which these feasts were recorded. For example, there is the agricultural calendar, and the astronomical calendar, and the lunar calendar, and the popular or civil calendar. The celestial feasts depend on the astronomical calendar or the lunar calendar. Each and every Egyptian deity, whether it was big or small in state, had its own festival. But during the New Kingdom, the cult of the great gods seemed to be more important concerning the levels and the performed rituals and the people's participation. Ahead of these feasts are the feasts of Ammon and Osiris, and Sukkor and Hur and Min, and Hathor and Sekhmet. Amongst the other feasts connected with cities and temples are the feasts of Khnum and Anokit in Elephantine, and it was beginning from the 18th day in Hathor month. The religious festivals started with the beginning of the ancient Egyptian history. This is confirmed by what came on the reliefs of Palermo stone, amongst the list of the principal religious events throughout the first 5 dynasties. For this stone mentions some of these feasts, like the feasts of gods Horus and Seker, and Min and Anubis, and goddess Seshat. The researcher Shute gave in his study a list of the dates of the festivals which were celebrated across all the ancient Egyptian festivals and throughout the consequent months of the year, in addition to the last 5 festive days of the year. The number of the days of these festivals have reached 162 days during the era of Ramesses III, which equates almost half a year. The inundation season was the most season of the year in which celebrations and popular and religious feasts were done. The reason behind that may be the duration of the flood season for 100 days. These days were almost free days of work for the farmers, for the works in the fields stopped because of the flood, which was an insinuation to the Egyptian to use his vacation times in holding festivals and celebrating. Amongst these festivals are the Flood Feast and the Jarahoti Feast in the 17th of July, and the New Year's Feast and El Wash Feast, and the Drunk Feast, and the Opet Feast, and Osiris Feast, and Petah Sokar Osiris Feast, and so many other feasts, each celebrated in its own special day. The celestial feasts celebrated in ancient Egypt include the feasts of the celestial calendar and the lunar calendar, like the feast of Peret Sobdet or the exit of Sobdet. There are also festivals connected to the lunar calendar or the lunar month, like the feast of the new year Tebesh Rembet and the feast of the completion of the month Iyahwer. Also the monthly feast of the beginning of the month Tebesh Ibet and the middle of the month Tebesh Semdet. In the Old Kingdom, there were lunar festivals celebrated, like the feast called Senwet, and it was celebrated on the 6th day, and the feast Janjet, celebrated on the 7th day, and the 23rd day. The national feasts were celebrated all across the country and were divided into 2 kinds. The first kind are festivals confined on the employees and priests of the temples, without the participation of the common people. Amongst these festivals is a feast of Sobdet, or the Doggy Star Feast, which coincided with the first day of Achet month, which was a flood month, and the first season of the year. The second kind are the feasts confined upon the class of the priests related to the services of the temples, but it's noticeable that the common people participated in them. Amongst these feasts is the New Year's Feast and Hathor's Feast. The local festivals are the feasts of the god of the nome or the region in which each deity was sanctified. The feasts of god Ammon in Thebes are the best examples of that kind of festivals. Included also the feast of god Petah in Memphis, which happened in the 24th day of the 4th month of the season of Shemmo, or the summer, which was the last season of the year. There are clear reasons which justify and clarify the reasons beyond the celebration of festivals in ancient Egypt, but there are as well hidden reasons, represented in immortalizing certain events of the legends of the gods to be acted in front of the people on different occasions, or events connected with the memory of the victory in some battle. The dates of some Egyptian festivals came on several scattered sources, kept mostly in the records of the temples, like the lists of the festivals in Komombo Temple. There was a mention about special prayers of these feasts in the cults of the dead since the Old Kingdom. The anthems of praising the dead appeared in Abydos area side by side with those prayers during the Middle Kingdom. Although the dates of celebrating these festivals were not mentioned in these texts, yet it's obvious that the dates of the feasts were known to them in a way that didn't require the need to write them down inside their texts. These prayers expressed a lot about the stages and the rituals of these festivals. For example, the people used to light their torches above the tombs for the dead and bring them water, and that happened in the festivals of the beginning of the year. They may wish their dead a happy voyage to Abydos, like in the Feast of the Dead called El Waj, when they made models of boats and placed them on the tombs headed for Abydos. As for Soccer's feast, they wished to carry the sacred boat of Soccer, or follow their deity in his parade by the walls of Memphis, surrounding their necks with packs of onion. The festivals recorded on the walls of the ancient Egyptian temples and tombs are considered one of the important sources of feasts and the levels and stages of celebrating them. Most of the scenes of the feasts during the Old Kingdom came from the reliefs of the pyramids and one of the temples of Abu Sir, where we find some of the scenes which are concerned with the Hebset feast or the Jubilee festival. The remaining parts of the funerary temple of King Montuhotep II in El Deir el-Bahari kept us the rest of the scenes of the celebration of the dead people local feast in the Theban cemetery, and which is called the Valley of the Beautiful Desert. The early temples of the New Kingdom include many scenes of festivals. So we see the scene of the boat and the Nile journey of God Amun from Luxor Temple to God Amun's temple in Karnak, in addition to the parade of the sacred boats of Min and Soccer, and also the chapel of Queen Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, and other places and walls which had those reliefs. The most important festival in Thebes was the Opet festival, and its scenes are recorded on the walls of Luxor Temple in a consequent and complete way. There are some other feasts represented on the walls of Karnak and Luxor temples and the other temples in the Western Cemetery, in addition to the rituals of celebrating the New Year's feast and the parade of Min and other deities. The scenes of feasts were also recorded in the tombs of the Old Kingdom within the usual scenes of the daily life. In the New Kingdom era, the scenes of the traditions of celebrating feasts appeared, especially the ones related to the New Year and the Valley Feast. On the walls of the western tombs of Thebes, we found the pictures of the Valley Feast scenes. The families of Thebes celebrated that feast in the halls of the tombs of their dead and around the way of the parade of the god. The ancient Egyptian feasts included many rituals, from which we found a few. Perhaps the songs and chants of these feasts, found on the walls of temples, go back mostly to the rituals of the feasts. Unfortunately, these rituals which were actually performed in Thebes were gone, except the rituals of Amenophis I. In the temple of Ramesses III Habu Temple, there is a series of scenes projecting his celebrations, as well as some papyri which preserved some of these rituals. Amongst the rituals, one that shows the tragedy of Osiris in Karnak Temple, which is the celebration temple of King Thutmose III. Books were presented to the priests to recite from them during the festival. The rituals performed in that day included a lot of meanings that the mourners performed in the grieving days in the tragedy of Osiris. In the Greek period, many rituals of festivals which remained from Osiris Chapel, which was on the ceiling of Hathor's temple in Dendera, and other temples, are shown and preserved. Amongst the example of the deceased festivals, which are celebrated by the Egyptians and goes back to the Middle Kingdom era, the ones found in the 10 contracts sealed between Jebjephi, the governor of Asyut, with the priests of the temple of Webwawut, to guarantee the continuity of performing the funerary rituals in his tomb. The first local feast celebrated in Siwa is the Feast of Sidi Soliman, which means Saint Solomon. The tomb of Sidi Soliman, which lies next to the Great Mosque in the big square of Siwa city, is the most holy place in the Oasis. That's because Sidi Soliman is the father of saints there, for the strong belief in his sanctity and the miracles he can perform. Celebrating his birthday comes after harvesting seeds. It seemed that this festival replaced an ancient pagan harvest feast. That feast used to be a lot of fun, with the drinking of wine and elugji, local alcoholic drink. But the government prohibited drinking it or any similar kind of wine in public during the week of celebrating that festival. That's to prevent any misfortunate accidents and quarrels amongst El Zukala when they are drunk. El-Lebji is a drink extracted from the heart of the date palms and becomes intoxicant when fermented. However, this feast is still the most important feast in Siwa, for it brings back the festivities of the past. It had replaced 2 ancient unreligious feasts, and the way it's celebrated comprises the most common factors and features between all the preceding festivals. Ashura Feast was the principal feast in Siwa few hundred years ago, but now it comes second in importance after the feast of Sidi Soliman. The origin of Ashura is religious. It memorizes the martyrdom of El-Husayn's family, who are the children of Ali and Fatma, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, for they were murdered in Karbala in Iraq in the 10th of the month of Muharram, that comes after El-Adha feast by 30 days. This feast was so important during the Fatimid rule in North Africa and Egypt more than 1,000 years ago. Today, the Muslim Shiite celebrate it with a great sublimity.